The House of the Rising Sun. The House of the Rising Sun is a traditional folk song, sometimes called Rising Sun Blues. It tells of a person's life gone wrong in the city of New Orleans. Many versions also urge a sibling or parents and children to avoid the same fate. The most successful commercial version, recorded in 1964 by the British rock band The Animals, was a #1 hit on the UK singles chart and also in the US and France. As a traditional folk song recorded by an electric rock band, it has been described as the first folk rock hit. The song was first collected in Appalachia in the 1930s, but probably has its roots in traditional English folk song. Origin and early versions. Origin. Like many classic folk ballads, The House of the Rising Sun is of uncertain authorship. Musicologists say that it is based on the tradition of broadside ballads, and thematically it has some resemblance to the 16th century ballad The Unfortunate Rake, yet there is no evidence suggesting that there is any direct relation. According to Alan Lomax, Rising Sun was the name of a bawdy house in two traditional English songs, and it was also a name for English pubs. He further suggested that the melody might be related to a 17th century folk song, Lord Barnard and Little Musgrave, also known as Matty Groves, but a survey by Bertrand Bronson showed no clear relationship between the two songs. Lomax proposed that the location of the house was then relocated from England to the US by white Southern performers. In 1953, Lomax interviewed Harry Cox, a farm laborer who knew a version of the song beginning with "If you go to Lowestoft," and asked for the rising sun. It is believed to be unlikely that Cox was aware of the U.S. song, and the theme of the song has similarities to later versions. It is also lead credence by the fact that there was a pub in Lowestoft called the Rising Sun, and by the fact that the town is the most easterly point in the UK, hence Rising Sun. However, doubt has been expressed as to whether Coxey's song has any connection to later versions. Meanwhile, folklorist Vance Randolph proposed an alternative French origin, the rising sun referring to the decorative use of the sunburst insignia dating to the time of Louis Roman XIV, which was brought to North America by French immigrants. House of Rising Sun was said to have been known by miners in 1905. The oldest published version of the lyrics is that printed by Robert Winslow Gordon in 1925 in a column Old Songs That Men Have Sung in Adventure magazine. The lyrics of that version begin, "The oldest known recording of the song, under the title Rising Sun Blues, is by Appalachian artists Clarence Tom Ashley and Gwen Foster, who recorded it on September 6, 1933 on the Vocalion label 2576. Ashley said he had learned it from his grandfather, Enoch Ashley, who got married around the time of the Civil War, which suggests that the song could have been written years before the turn of the century. Roy Acuff, an early-day friend and apprentice of Clarence Ashley's, learned it from him and recorded it as Rising Sun on November 3, 1938. There is a common perception that, prior to The Animals, the song was about and from the perspective of a woman. This is incorrect, as the narrative of the lyrics has been continually whipped back and forth from a female to a male cautionary tale. The earliest known printed version from Gordon's column is about a woman's warning. The earliest known recording of the song by Ashley is about a rounder, a male character. The lyrics of that version begin, "On an expedition with his wife to eastern Kentucky, the folklorist Alan Lomax set up his recording equipment in Middlesboro, in the house of the singer and activist Tillman Cadle, husband of Mary Elizabeth Barnacle. There he recorded a performance by Georgia Turner, the 16-year-old daughter of a local miner. He called it the Rising Sun Blues." Lomax recorded two other different versions in eastern Kentucky in 1937, both of which can be heard online, one sung by Dawson Henson and another by Bert Martin. In his 1941 songbook Our Singing Country, Lomax credits the song to Georgia Turner, using Martin's extra lyrics to complete the song. The famous Kentucky folk singer Jean Ritchie sang a different traditional version of the song to Lomax in 1949. The recording can be heard online courtesy of the Alan Lomax Archive. Several older blues recordings of songs with similar titles are unrelated. For example, Rising Sun Blues by Ivy Smith 1927, but bluesologist for Texas music Coy Prather has argued that The Rising Sun by Texas Alexander 1928 is an early blues version of the hillbilly song. Early folk and blues releases. In 1941, Woody Guthrie recorded a version. Keynote Records released one by Josh White in 1942, and Decca Records released one also in 1942 with music by White and the vocals performed by Libby Holman. Holman and White also collaborated on a 1950 release by Mercury Records. White is also credited with having written new words and music that have subsequently been popularized in the versions made by many other later artists. White learned the song from a white hillbilly singer, who might have been Ashley, in North Carolina in 1923-1924. Lead Belly recorded two versions of the song, in February 1944 and in October 1948, called In New Orleans and The House of the Rising Sun, respectively. The latter was recorded in sessions that were later used on the album Lead Belly's Last Sessions, 1994, Smithsonian Folkways. In 1957, Glenn Yarbrough recorded the song for Elektra Records. The song is also credited to Ronnie Gilbert on an album by the Weavers released in the late 1940s or early 1950s. Pete Seeger released a version on Folkways Records in 1958, which was re-released by Smithsonian Folkways in 2009. Andy Griffith recorded the song on his 1959 album, Andy Griffith Shouts the Blues and Old-Timey Songs. In 1960, Miriam Makeba recorded the song on her eponymous RCA album. Joan Baez recorded it in 1960 on her self-titled debut album. She frequently performed the song in concert throughout her career. Nina Simone recorded her first version for the live album Nina at the Village Gate in 1962. Simone later covered the song again on her 1967 studio album Nina Simone Sings the Blues. Tim Hardin sang it on This Is Tim Hardin, recorded in 1964 but not released until 1967. The Chambers Brothers recorded a version on Feelin' the Blues, released on Vault Records 1970. Van Ronk arrangement. In late 1961, Bob Dylan recorded the song for his debut album, released in March 1962. That release had no songwriting credit, but the liner notes indicate that Dylan learned this version of the song from Dave Van Ronk. In an interview for the documentary No Direction Home, Van Ronk said that he was intending to record the song and that Dylan copied his version. Van Ronk recorded it soon thereafter for the album Just Dave Van Ronk. I had learned it sometime in the 1950s from a recording by Hallie Wood, the Texas singer and collector, who had got it from an Alan Lomax field recording by a Kentucky woman named Georgia Turner. I put a different spin on it by altering the chords and using a bass line that descended in half steps, a common enough progression in jazz, but unusual among folk singers. By the early 1960s, the song had become one of my signature pieces, and I could hardly get off the stage without doing it. Then, one evening in 1962, I was sitting at my usual table in the back of the Kettle of Fish, and Dylan came slouching in. He had been up at the Columbia Studios with John Hammond doing his first album. He was being very mysterioso about the whole thing, and nobody I knew had been to any of the sessions except Suze, his lady. I pumped him for information, but he was vague. Everything was going fine, and hey, would it be okay for me to record your arrangement of House of the Rising Sun? Oh shit. Geez, Bobby, I'm going into the studio to do that myself in a few weeks. Can't it wait until your next album? A long pause. Uh-oh. I did not like the sound of that. What exactly do you mean, uh-oh? Well, he said sheepishly, I've already recorded it. The Animals version. An interview with Eric Burdon revealed that he first heard the song in a club in Newcastle, England, where it was sung by the Northumbrian folk singer Johnny Handel. The Animals were on tour with Chuck Berry and chose it because they wanted something distinctive to sing. The Animals had begun featuring their arrangement of The House of the Rising Sun during a joint concert tour with Chuck Berry, using it as their closing number to differentiate themselves from acts that always closed with straight rockers. It got a tremendous reaction from the audience, convincing initially reluctant producer Mickey Most that it had hit potential, and between tour stops the group went to a small recording studio on Kingsway in London to capture it. Recording and releases. The song was recorded in just one take on May 18, 1964, and it starts with a now famous electric guitar, a minor chord arpeggio by Helton Valentine. According to Valentine, he simply took Dylan's chord sequence and played it as an arpeggio. The performance takes off with Burton's lead vocal, which has been variously described as howling, soulful, and as deep and gravelly as the northeast English coal town of Newcastle that spawned him. Finally, Alan Price's pulsating organ part played on a Vox Continental completes the sound. Parton later said, "We were looking for a song that would grab people's attention." As recorded, The House of the Rising Sun ran 4.5 minutes, regarded as far too long for a pop single at the time. Producer Most, who initially did not really want to record the song at all, said that on this occasion, "Everything was in the right place. It only took 15 minutes to make, so I can't take much credit for the production." He was nonetheless now a believer, and declared it a single at its full length, saying, "We're in a microgroove world now. We will release it." In the US, however, the original single MGM 13,264 was a 258 version. The MGM Golden Circle reissue KGC 159 and the record label gives the edited playing time of 258. The edited version was included on the group's 1964 US debut album The Animals, while the full version was later included on their best-selling 1966 US Greatest Hits album, The Best of the Animals. However, the very first American release of the full-length version was on a 1965 album of various groups entitled Mickey Most Presents British Go-Go MGM's Eminence 4306, the cover of which, under the listing of House of the Rising Sun, described it as the original uncut version. Americans could also hear the complete version in the movie Go-Go Mania in the spring of 1965. House of the Rising Sun was not included on any of the group's British albums, but it was reissued as a single twice in subsequent decades, charting both times, reaching number 25 in 1972 and number 11 in 1982. The Animals version was played in 6/8 meter, unlike the 4/4 of most earlier versions. Arranging credit went only to Alan Price. According to Burton, this was simply because there was insufficient room to name all 5 band members on the record label, and Alan Price's first name was first alphabetically. However, this meant that only Price received songwriters' royalties for the hit, a fact that has caused bitterness among the other band members ever since. Personnel. Eric Burden vocals, Hilton Valentine electric guitar, Chaz Chandler bass guitar, Alan Price Vox Continental organ, John Steele drums and percussion. Reception. House of the Rising Sun was a transatlantic hit. After reaching the top of the UK pop singles chart in July 1964, it topped the US pop singles chart 2 months later, on September 5, 1964, where it stayed for 3 weeks. Many cite this as the first true classic rock song, and became the first British invasion #1 unconnected with the Beatles. It was the group's breakthrough hit in both countries and became their signature song. The song was also a hit in Ireland twice, peaking at no. 10 upon its initial release in 1964, and later reaching a brand new peak of no. 5 when reissued in 1982. According to John Steele, Bob Dylan told him that when he first heard the Animals version on his car radio, he stopped to listen, jumped out of his car and banged on the hood of the car, inspiring him to go electric. Dave Van Ronk, said that the Animals' version liked Dylan's version before it was based on his arrangement of the song. Dave Marsh described the Animals' take on the House of the Rising Sun as the first folk rock hit, sounding as if they'd connected the ancient tune to a live wire. Writer Ralph McLean of the BBC agreed that it was arguably the first folk rock tune and a revolutionary single, after which the face of modern music was changed forever. The Animals' rendition of the song is recognized as one of the classics of British pop music. Writer Lester Bangs labeled it a brilliant rearrangement and a new standard rendition of an old standard composition. It ranked number 122 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of 500 greatest songs of all time. It is also one of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. The RIAA ranked it number 240 on their list of songs of the century. In 1999, it received a Grammy Hall of Fame award. It has long since become a staple of oldies and classic rock radio formats. A 2005 Channel 5 poll ranked it as Britain's fourth favorite number one song. Charts. Certifications. Frigid Pink version. In 1969, the Detroit band Frigid Pink recorded a psychedelic version of House of the Rising Sun, which became an international hit in 1970. Their version is in 4/4 time like Van Ronk's and most earlier versions, rather than the 6/8 used by the Animals, and was driven by Gary Ray Thompson's distorted guitar with fuzz and wah-wah effects, set against the frenetic drumming of Richard Stevers. According to Stevers, the Frigid Pink recording of House of the Rising Sun was done impromptu, when there was time left over at a recording session booked for the group at the Terra Firma recording studios. Stevers later played snippets from that session's tracks for Paul Cannon, the music director of Detroit's premier rock radio station, WKNR. The two knew each other, as Cannon was the father of Stevers's girlfriend. Stevers recalled, "We went through the whole thing and Cannon didn't say much. Then House of the Rising Sun started up, and I immediately turned it off because it wasn't anything I really wanted him to hear." However, Cannon was intrigued and had Stevers play the complete track for him, then advising Stevers, "Tell Parrot Frigid Pink's label to drop God Gave Me You, the group's current single, and go with this one." Frigid Pink's House of the Rising Sun debuted at number 29 on the WKNR hit parade dated January 6, 1970, and broke nationally after some 7 weeks, during which the track was resurfaced to radio 3 times, with a number 73 debut on the Hot 100 in Billboard dated February 27, 1970, number 19. The certification of the Frigid Pink single House of the Rising Sun as a gold record for domestic sales of 1 million units was reported in the issue of Billboard dated May 30, 1970. The Frigid Pink single of House of the Rising Sun would give the song its most widespread international success, with top 10 status reached in Austria number 3, Belgium Flemish region number 6, Canada number 3, Denmark number 3, Germany 2 weeks at number 1, Greece, Ireland number 7, Israel number 4, the Netherlands. The single also charted in Australia number 14, France number 36, and Italy number 54. Charts. Sales and certifications. Billboard's country chart. The song has twice been a hit record on Billboard's country chart. Dolly Parton version. In August 1981, Dolly Parton released a cover of the song as the third single from her album 9 to 5 and Odd Jobs. Like Miller's earlier country hit, Parton's remake returns the song to its original lyric of being about a fallen woman. The Parton version makes it quite blunt, with a few new lyric lines that were written by Parton. Parton's remake reached number 14 on the U.S. country singles chart and crossed over to the pop charts, where it reached number 77 on the Billboard Hot 100. It also reached number 30 on the U.S. adult contemporary chart. Parton has occasionally performed the song live, including on her 1987-88 television show in an episode taped in New Orleans. Five Finger Death Punch version. The American heavy metal band Five Finger Death Punch released a cover of House of the Rising Sun on their fifth studio album, The Wrong Side of Heaven and The Righteous Side of Hell Volume 2, which was later released as the album's second single and the band's third single of the Wrong Side era. The Las Vegas-based band changed mentions of New Orleans in the lyrics to instead say Sin City, as in the Las Vegas Strip. The song was a top 10 hit on mainstream rock radio in the United States. It was also featured in the video game Guitar Hero Live. Other notable versions: in 1973, Jody Miller's version reached number 29 on the country charts and number 41 on the adult contemporary chart. In 1977, Santa Esmeralda scored a top 20 disco hit with a dance version of the song. British indie rock band Alt J covered the song in their 2017 album Relaxer, with an additional verse written by the band themselves. American musician and singer-songwriter Jake Smith covered the song with the Forest Rangers. It was featured on Season 4 of Sons of Anarchy. Language versions: Johnny Hallyday version in French. The song was covered in French by Johnny Hallyday. His version, titled Le Pénitencier, pronounced L at Penitest, was released in October 1964 and spent 1 week at number 1 on the singles sales chart in France from October 17 to 23. In Wallonia, Belgium, his single spent 28 weeks on the chart, also peaking at number 1. He performed the song during his 2014 U.S. tour. Los Speakers version in Spanish. Colombian band Los Speakers covered the song under the title La Casa del Sol Nascent in their 1965 album of the same name. Charts: Ivy version and Wilbert Eckart on St. Volksmusik Stars versions in German. Two notable German covers/adaptations were created, one by Ernst Oljamin Vereinssicherung, which in 1989 recorded a song with lyrics telling the story of an East Germany citizen fleeing East Berlin after the fall of the Berlin Wall and his following disillusion with Western society. Another that gained international recognition was created for the soundtrack of Wolfenstein: The New Order in 2014, interpreting the song with Volksmusik instrumentation, fitting the alternate future theme of the game in which Nazi Germany won World War II, as part of a collection of adapted pop hits. Possible real locations: various places in New Orleans have been proposed as the inspiration for the song, with varying plausibility. The phrase House of the Rising Sun is often understood as a euphemism for a brothel, but it is not known whether the house described in the lyrics was an actual or a fictitious place. One theory is that the song is about a woman who killed her father, an alcoholic gambler who had beaten his wife. Therefore, the House of the Rising Sun may be a jailhouse, from which one would be the first person to see the sunrise, an idea supported by the lyric mentioning a ball and chain, though that phrase has been slang for marital relationships for at least as long as the song has been in print. Because women often sang the song, another theory is that the House of the Rising Sun was where prostitutes were detained while being treated for syphilis. Since cures with mercury were ineffective, going back was very unlikely. Only 3 candidates that use the name Rising Sun have historical evidence from old city directories and newspapers. The first was a small, short-lived hotel on Conti Street in the French Quarter in the 1820s. It burned down in 1822. An excavation and document search in early 2005 found evidence that supported this claim, including an advertisement with language that may have euphemistically indicated prostitution. Archaeologists found an unusually large number of pots of rouge and cosmetics at the site. The second possibility was a Rising Sun hole listed in late 19th century city directories on what is now Cherokee Street, at the riverfront in the uptown Carrollton neighborhood, which seems to have been a building owned and used for meetings of a social aid and pleasure club, commonly rented out for dances and functions. It also is no longer extant. Definite links to gambling or prostitution, if any, are undocumented for either of these buildings. A third was the Rising Sun, which advertised in several local newspapers in the 1860s, located on what is now the lakeside of the 100 block of Decatur Street. In various advertisements, it is described as a restaurant, a lager beer salon, and a coffee house. At the time, New Orleans businesses listed as coffee houses often also sold alcoholic beverages. Dave Van Ronk claimed in his biography, The Mayor of MacDougall Street, that at one time when he was in New Orleans, someone approached him with a number of old photos of the city from the turn of the century. Among them was a picture of a foreboding stone doorway with a carving on the lintel of a stylized rising sun. Bizarre New Orleans, a guidebook on New Orleans, asserts that the real house was at 1614 Esplanade Avenue between 1862 and 1874, and was said to have been named after its madam, Marion Le Soleil Levant, whose surname means the rising sun in French. Another guidebook, Offbeat New Orleans, asserts that the real house of the rising sun was at 826-830 St. Louis Saint between 1862 and 1874, also purportedly named for Marion Le Soleil Levant. The building still stands, and Eric Burden, after visiting at the behest of the owner, said, "The house was talking to me." There is a contemporary be, and be called the House of the Rising Sun, decorated in brothel style. The owners are fans of the song, but there is no connection with the original place. Not everyone believes that the house actually existed. Pamela D. Arsenault, a research librarian at the Williams Research Center in New Orleans, is quoted as saying, "I have made a study of the history of prostitution in New Orleans and have often confronted the perennial question, 'Where is the house of the rising sun?' without finding a satisfactory answer." Although it is generally assumed that the singer is referring to a brothel, there is actually nothing in the lyrics that indicate that the house is a brothel. Many knowledgeable persons have conjectured that a better case can be made for either a gambling hall or a prison. However, to paraphrase Freud, sometimes lyrics are just lyrics.